Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the L1A podcast, Love One Another. It's been so fun last season and this season just to get to talk to just some incredible people who are living this out, who are obeying Jesus from their home and their cities with one another. And I'm really excited about today's episode. This is an amazing brother, actually two of my brothers, but someone new on the episode, Britton Smith, and joined by Neal Karsten today. Two brothers I've known since 2014 that have just been brothers in the fire, advocates, friends, peer to peer, just incredible brothers living this out in their hometowns in Michigan and all over the world, all over North America. But today's a special episode because we're taking a little bit different angle to talking about Pastor to Pioneer, an initiative that Britton and Neal and a few others started that are really helping pastors step out and live into movement principles in simple ways. And so I'll let them share all about that today, but welcome to another episode of L1A.
Welcome to the L1A podcast, a space to connect, communicate, and collaborate for the advancement of the kingdom in North America and beyond. Here we will discuss the disciple-making movement that is happening in this Western context and the return to God's design for discipleship, church, and life.
All right, well, Britton, I'm excited for Neal to introduce you, but before he does, this is a question we've been asking everybody on the podcast, and I just want to see what the flavor of the day is for you. If you could be best friends with any of the disciples or early church leaders, who would you pick and why?
Man, that's like a tough question. I feel like everyone's going to probably give the same answers. You want to like say you're going to pick an obscure one that barely gets mentioned, so you get to know him more. But I'm not going to do that. I think actually I'm not going to be one of the disciples. It would probably be Stephen, and I'm just curious about what that was like when he was going out with signs and wonders with the gospel and seeing the sorcerer come to faith and that whole, just like amazing things taking place. I think would be awesome to see that through the conversations and firsthand experience with Stephen.
That's amazing, and that's a first on the show. No one has mentioned Stephen yet, so that's really cool.
Yes,
yep.
Right.
You got him.
It's because he cheated. He didn't pick like
listening.
One of the immediate disciples.
He's also been listening.
Well, he gave me an out. He said one of the disciples or early church leaders, and so I thought,
I guess he did say that.
Right, let's go with early church
I'm just glad you didn't pick Judas. But all
right, Neal, I would have a few questions for him.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Neal, do you mind just taking a minute and just introducing Britton for everybody?
Yeah, definitely. Britton is one of my best friends. We've been laboring together in the West Michigan area for, we met when we were in seminary together. We could share way too much story here, but so Britton and I we've been laboring in this direction for, I want to say, coming up on 9 years now, right around there. And in that, we were both in different churches, but we were both feeling the same thing. And so we had known each other before this. We had been getting together to pray, read the Bible together. And in all that, we just said, hey, why don't we get some people together and start learning what does it look like to be the church in a simple way, to see all hands on deck, priesthood of all believers. But as we were doing this, we had no clue what we were doing, and we had no clue what we were stepping into. This was just us kind of taking a step in the Lord. I'm going to let Britton share more of his story, but kind of what that's led to now a little bit is he and I and a couple others have helped really launch something that's called Pastor to Pioneer. Just realizing we were both pastors. There's other pastors out there who are really exploring this, wondering what could this look like for me? And the question becomes is, how do we find them and how do we walk with them well as they're trying to figure out what can a lifestyle of intentional disciple making, helping to start simple churches, ideally seeing those things multiply, what can that look like for the person who's a pastor? In the midst of it, Britton, I'll let you share kind of your state of life right now, where you're at and such like that. So go ahead, Britton.
Yeah, thanks, Neal. It's great to be on the podcast, guys. I was a pastor for 16 years. The last 12 of those years, I was a senior pastor of a church that I'd come on board shortly after it started, and we saw a lot of success in the eyes of the world. But Neil and I were asking a lot of questions early on, going, are we actually like, I don't know, making disciples? And that's kind of a humbling question to ask when everyone around you is like, oh, the church is growing, it's successful. But it's like in your heart, it's not adding up. Something like, there's more to it. And so when Neil and I just got like honest and having raw conversations, we realized we weren't doing a great job of making disciples, and at least making disciples that can make other disciples. And so that led us on this journey of being the church in the simple way. But for many of those years, I was still a senior pastor of a church and exploring more simple ways of being the church and disciple making and figuring out how these went together. And do I implement these in my church? Do I not implement these in my church? And I felt like I was asking some questions that I didn't know where to go for answers all the time, because I could receive some amazing training on how to start simple churches and how to make disciples. But I didn't have a ton of coaching or answers to my questions. And how do I do this as a pastor in the institutional church? Do I stay and try to transition it? Do I do this on the side? Do I leave? I mean, there's so many questions I was asking. And my journey eventually led me to stepping away in September of 2021 and exclusively doing simple church, making disciples in my city. But then November of 2022, my family and I actually sold our house and a lot of our stuff. We bought a fifth-wheel camper and a truck, and we've been full-time on the road since then. And so that's been wild, a wild ride, connecting with other pastors and leaders of Simple Church and disciple-making movement stuff around the country. And that has been an incredible gift.
That's amazing. And I was a benefactor of your very first stop on that on the Tour de Smith, and getting to stop on our farm. And man, we were just so blessed by you and your family. Just prayer times together, time around the bonfire, just getting to seek Jesus together. And so I can't imagine just what the rest of the time has looked like, stop after stop, with folks on that journey. But when we're talking about pastor to pioneer, just help those that are listening right now. What's kind of your heart behind it, and what has really taken place since you've stepped out and doing this with other pastors?
For us, we just wanted to be the support that I think Neil and I wish we would have had as we were walking on this journey, that we help other pastors that are asking some of these deeper questions. They can maybe name why they're having this wrestling or discontent, but some of them don't know why. They're feeling like something's off. There's got to be more to it than this. They're looking at the church system going, it's not adding up. It's not delivering what it's promising. Do I just leave? I mean, there's just so many questions that we want to help those pastors explore another way. And we realize it's not for everybody, but there are more and more pastors that are asking these questions. And so we try to get to some of the deeper underlying principles and paradigm shifts that need to take place to step into some of this disciple making and simple church work, rather than just teaching them how to meet in their home. That's the easy part, right? But it's the deeper questions that we help them work through and think through. What are some of the issues with our current structure, and what would need to change, and how you function, and the role of a pastor, and the role of what it looks like to get together as the church and make those shifts, but also to walk with them in some deeper relational ways as they're starting to ask the question of, how do I pay the bills? This is a huge adjustment for my family. It's hard to leave these people that I love. We want to be with them in a relational way to support them as they make the step from their role in the institutional church to pioneering disciple making and simple church movements in their city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things we kind of have learned along the way is pastors in a unique way are a people group. It seems strange to think of it like that, but you have churches that in certain sense seem very different. Like you can have high church, high liturgy, robes and all that sort of stuff, or you can have very casual sorts of church. But honestly, a lot of those pastors have experienced a lot of the same things. So to be able to go and meet them, and honestly, a lot of those pastors, especially now, are asking a lot more questions, because the culture is just changing so fast, and especially the church culture is changing really fast. And so it has so many more pastors like considering like, oh, this whole movement mentality, which I think is gaining steam, throughout the United States. They're wondering, does this go with my traditional church? Does it not? How do I do this? How do I navigate it? So as we've been having lots of conversations with different pastors and leaders, it's unique to kind of notice some of the trends that just come out of those continued conversations.
I love the way you put that too, just how it really is a people group. They speak their own
Yep.
language. There's its own tribe, its own culture, the own value sets, the own shared experiences that a lot of people in the congregation don't see or don't understand. But when the pastors get in those circles, they all have those same type of concerns, like you said, the same type of questions. And one thing that both of you guys do very well is walking patiently and graciously with these leaders. Because I know one thing that Pastor to Pioneer is not is bashing pastors or old models. It's like, hey, we've been there too. We know what you're feeling. We know what you're talking about, and we know the dissatisfaction that you're feeling. Let's walk through that together. Let's work through that together so that we can get to a place of effectiveness and joy and fruitfulness in ministry. So I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but just by seeing you guys walk that out, I know is super encouraging. So Neal, you just mentioned some trends, and so to both of you guys, what are some different trends you've seen, maybe even the last 5-10 years of what is happening with pastors and churches?
Yeah. I can share a couple, and then Britton, I mean, we could talk about this for probably a while, but I think one of the things that we've noticed on repeat is there are a lot of pastors who really want to make a transition. Okay. But they kind of feel trapped in what they're doing. So they hear of this movement sort of mentality and all that stuff. And I think some honestly are approaching it for the wrong reasons, just to be kind of blunt about it. But I think even those who are approaching it for healthy reasons, they will also run into barriers that really inhibit them from stepping from paradigm A, where they're kind of living, into paradigm B. And I think we've seen 4 things just on repeat that come up. One of the big ones is the obvious one. It's their paycheck. You know what I mean? This is their livelihood. It's not just a mission sort of a thing. It's also their livelihood. So they're sitting here saying, man, if I transition from being a pastor in this regard and step it into pioneering more movement stuff, how will I pay the bills? Okay, so that's one. Second one would be, this isn't true of all of them, but a lot of times it can be an identity thing. A lot of pastors have worked really hard. They've gone to school for a long time. And now to be a pastor in many places still is a respected thing. It's respected amongst your family, your friends, all that sort of stuff. And to be like, I'm stepping away from that, you are potentially giving up a piece of your identity. So that's also an inhibitor. Third one, I don't know how to best phrase this yet, but we would just say like a misplaced love for the people. So they think the best way to love the people who I am shepherding, who I'm pastoring, is to try to bring them all with me on this journey. And in short, what we've kind of realized is the people who came into the doors of that building did not sign up for the sort of thing that's being birthed in your heart. And so it's helping to discern that and to think well about that. And then the fourth one is typically just spousal difference. So you might have let's say the husband is a pastor, his desire is to jump, but the wife is a little bit more reserved, a little bit more anxious about what would we do with the kids? How would we pay the bills? And maybe the husband is ready to go. So those are the sorts of things where then in relationship, we actually come alongside, help walk with, help think through those really well. Britton, what are some other trends that you've been noticing?
I mean, I think during COVID, a lot of pastors started seeing things in a different lens of maybe more real, like a realization of the way things are. Maybe things have been that way a while, but COVID just really exposed it, right? And so I think one of those things I'm seeing with these pastors is they're exhausted, they're worn out, they've given their lives, and sometimes a lot of them have sacrificed their family on the altar of ministry. They've given everything they have, and they're kind of looking at it going, for what? Like, what do I have to show for this? A lot of them, I think, are realizing, while people aren't as far along in their walk with the Lord as I thought they were, while people are really dependent upon me or this system in order to have a walk with Jesus. Like when things are difficult and they're not able to do it in certain ways, like people's faith crumbles or they panic. And so I think a lot of pastors are realizing some of those things where, like Neal said, I'm saying talking to more and more pastors that are being honest with their wrestlings and giving themselves permission to dream of another way. And to Neal's point, like those are the 4 big barriers that we come across all the time with pastors, and because they're tough, they're real. Like those are big barriers for them to cross. But more and more pastors are getting to the place of going, it's going to be hard, but I can't keep doing what I'm doing. I mean, I just got together with a guy in Fort Myers actually recently, and it's a guy I got connected with through Pastor to Pioneer. And I was able to meet with him because we were in Fort Myers on our family road trip. And I was having lunch with him, and he said, you know what, Britton, like, you guys have been so relational with me. You've connected me with other people and that have just loved me and cared for me and met me where I was at, that provided a safe place for me to ask my questions, to be honest, to be vulnerable. And he said, if it wasn't for those relationships, I wouldn't have taken the step that I've just taken to tell my elders in the church that I'm walking away. And he didn't do it with like a bitter attitude or anything. He just knew there was something else for him. There was more. But he said, if I didn't have that relationship, there's no way I would have taken that step, because I would have felt alone and I would have felt crazy. And I think that's where a lot of pastors are. They feel alone and they feel crazy, or they wonder if they're crazy, right? They're asking these questions going, maybe I shouldn't ask these questions. Are these okay to ask? Are these okay to come to different conclusions? But I think that's the beauty of what we've seen in the relationship. And this we're trying to do with Pastor to Pioneer, is through the power of the relationship, then saying you're not alone, you're not crazy. Let's seek the Lord together and what he has for you, and start exploring some different ways, often much more simple ways of being the church.
That's amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Neal.
I was going to say one other thing I think we've been noticing as well is pastors' willingness to start speaking more openly and candidly about some of these things. And so I think a lot have even been feeling this for a while. And honestly, even pre-COVID, there's a lot of feeling about that. But I feel like now all of a sudden it's all just been expedited so quickly that there's a much greater willingness to talk about it. I think as well with that, a lot of research pertaining to statistics on the church and all that are just so much more readily available. So the macro picture of like the state of the church is easier to see. And so now, like, that other pastors aren't feeling as alone in some of those thoughts or feeling, I think it actually gives some more space to talk about it.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'm sure countless people are, if they do speak up, what's this going to mean for my family? What's this going to mean for my church? Will people start doubting my calling? Will they doubt that I'm really for them? Just all the different fears that to even ask these hard questions can cause. To have a space like you guys are creating for this is so needed. And so a question, I know this will probably strike a chord with both of you guys, but why? Why is this so important right now? In this time of in history, in our country, why do we need this right now?
I think one of the reasons why we need this specifically with pastors is because a lot of people can't imagine another way. The way we've been doing church has been this way for hundreds and hundreds of years, passed down generation to generation. And so you can start talking about maybe meeting in homes or simpler ways. And I think people maybe kind of get it, but it usually just turns out to be a program. And you think, oh, it's just like what we're doing in the building, we're just doing the house. And really what we're talking about is a totally different way of operating, totally different way of living together as the church. And that's sometimes hard for people to imagine until they can see it. And so I think one of the reasons why we intentionally use the word pioneers is pioneers are people that are entering into new territory, blazing a trail that doesn't exist. And pastors, I think, are some of the most uniquely equipped people to be able to do this and to blaze a new trail, to show others what it could look like, what it could be. So then others go, oh, now I see it. Oh, I get it now. But they can't until they see it.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, I think our hope is that being the church in a decentralized way, in a movement sort of mentality, becomes a much more normalized expression throughout North America. Okay. And we need more people to help pioneer that throughout their cities or throughout their states and things along those lines. Now, does that have to be pastors? Of course it doesn't. But the truth is that a lot of pastors have gifts that still have been built up, have been established through being pastors that are still largely transferable in movement situations, in mentalities. Not every like gift or skill set, so to say, is transferable in that regard, but the aspects of like dealing in hard situations, like a lot of pastors have walked through a lot of hard situations. And so now when you're out in the movement world and you're trying to walk in some of that stuff and it does get hard, they have a little bit of that under their belt already. Some of the biblical background can be really like helpful as well. Some of the theological aspects at times can be helpful. Now, if they go and want to domineer all the space with theological stuff, yeah, that can come and crush stuff as well. But if they do it well, it can actually be helpful. So I think we see this people group who is actually well suited if they can be retooled a little bit to help really pioneer and help normalize movement mentalities throughout North America.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
I'm going to say to that point, Neal, like I think pastors are used to asking deeply theological questions on what's the word say about this? Where do we find this in the Bible? And I think as we've worked with pastors, it's helping giving, in some senses, legitimacy to this disciple making movement idea, because they realize, wow, this is actually not just a new method. This is deeply rooted in Scripture. And so because they're so used to like, where's this found in the Word? Where's this found in the Word? They're able to go find this stuff in the Word, or when it's shown to them in the Word, they have a deeper buy-in, I guess I would say, to that, and then able to share that with others. It's not just, hey, let's go pass on this new method of meeting in homes and meeting this certain way. It's, this is what the Bible calls us to. These are the biblical principles on which the church should be operating, and we should be living as disciples. This is why we should do it. And I think pastors, not that other people can't do that, I think pastors are just used to operating that mindset, and so maybe they're able to do it a little quicker.
Yeah. And once again, like, just to, I think, highlight what you're saying, I think it's one of the hard things we run into is pastors then looking at movement mentality almost like a program. And there's a piece of that almost has to kind of melt away, and they need to learn a lifestyle. So like that's a bigger shift than can be articulated in those few words. But like one of the things that we've actually tried to do with that is not to just get a pastor to kind of learn some practices and go tell their church to go do it. But what does it look like for that pastor to actually start living that lifestyle, him or herself? You know, and so now,
can you say that one more time, because that's so important. That's so big.
I mean, it's unique because pastors are used to like going to conferences or going to trainings in order to receive preaching material. And what we're almost trying to say to them is, wait, don't take this as just preaching fodder. Like, take it and absorb it and put it into practice in your own home, with your own family, with those who you're really close with. And this might seem really strange because it's very different than normal movement stuff, but we almost tell them to hold off on some of the sharing stuff initially so that it can first be so absorbed into him or herself. And then after it's more established as lifestyle for them, then comes the aspect of really sharing. Because pastors are so used to actually sharing before putting things into obedience. That's what preachers, you know, you're looking for that next sermon series or whatever. So that's part of it being a people group. But Britton, you're going to jump in.
Well, I think part of what you're talking about, Neal, is like the reason why we do it, it's to help pastors detox. I mean, I think all of us, pastor or not, if you're going to step into some of this DMM stuff, there's a detox process from an old way into a new way. But that is especially true with pastors. Oh my goodness, right? Like if you just take the way you operate in the institution into the house, man, it's going to be a disaster. It's a different way of operating, different way of thinking, different way of looking at things, different way of being. And we just talk about often with people, be patient with yourself. There's going to be a detox process. And then you're going to detox for a bit and you're going to feel like I'm good. I'm clean from the old way. I've got all this clean time. And then all of a sudden stuff's going to come up more of going, whoa. I didn't realize that was in there. How like pastors are so used to having all the answers. They're so used to orchestrating things. They're so used to being the one in control that's a hard one to walk away from. So when you get in a house, that temptation comes up and you have to be mindful of not over functioning in the house. but empowering people. You're used to being the most skilled person in the room in a lot of ways, and that's why you do everything. Now you got to shift to empowering everybody, and it's them practicing and growing in those things by doing that they're going to get better at it. Right? There's so many different things that we don't always realize that are values of the institutional church that aren't values in a decentralized movement of disciple making that takes a long process of detoxing. And I think one of the best ways that happens is not just off on your own, but in relationship where you can encourage one another to go through the process of detoxing. Because detoxing's hard.
Yeah. And another way to put it too is, it's new wine and new wineskins. Like you guys said, like this isn't anything new. Like as our friend Guy Caskey says, we have to be bold enough to do something old. All of this is what Jesus and the disciples did. This is how we see the movements in Ephesus, Thessalonica, Philippi, so on and so forth. But it is a new wineskin, just as it was in that day. And it's a new wine and a new wineskin. And so that's going to take some time to have, like you guys have been saying, a paradigm shift. So what I'm hearing from you guys, from Pastor Pioneer, it's very relational, but you're also helping them walk through paradigm shifts, lifestyle changes, and then kind of some handles to begin to walk this out in simple ways. So maybe those that don't have context to Pastor to Pioneer, or even more so don't have context to movement practices and principles, can you maybe share a little bit of what this is not, just so people don't get maybe a wrong idea of what Pastor to Pioneer is, and saying what it is not might even give more clarity to what this is.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is this is not a program to revitalize your church. And I think there's a temptation to take some of these nuggets and then go, oh, I'm gonna change my church. I'm gonna implement a new program. We are very niche in what we do, and we look for pastors that already have some discontentment and are open to exploring a more simple way of being the church. And so we don't see this as a way to revitalize your church. We don't see this as a way to even transition your church. We don't often encourage that either. We are trying to be very specific to say, hey, we want to teach you and walk with you and model for you a way of stepping out of the institution into pioneering and disciple making and simple church work. There are a lot of other great organizations that are doing revitalization and this and that. Like we just try to stay in the lane that we feel like God's asked us to stay into. Neal, what would you add to that?
Along with that, I mean, to what I was just saying a minute ago, this isn't something to go and necessarily get your whole church to just try to do. This is like our desires that the pastor who comes and joins us in this is your desire to do. This isn't for your church to do. This is for you to do. And when we say to do, it's talking about this kind of lifestyle, switch. The other part is, we're willing to give people some training. We do all that sort of stuff. And people, we don't charge anything for that. We're not like, okay, hey, to go through the training, it costs this much or anything. So people can come and take that and then run off with it and not have any relationship. But our hope is actually to see people relationally connected. So we actually have a group of coaches. All the coaches who are doing this with us now used to be pastors in the traditional sense, have stepped away from that, and they're now pioneering, decentralized ways of being the church in their own areas and beyond. And so the people so Britton actually takes care of a lot of that, but a lot of times it's also trying to get people connected with people who it just seems to make sense. Sometimes that's geographic. Sometimes it's just mentality or personality or stuff like that. It's not just the random person who comes up. It's like, oh man, hey, like have an initial conversation, get to know this person, be like, you should really talk to our friend so-and-so. He might be a great person for you to connect with. So
good.
Yeah.
So where can people find you guys? Pastor to Pioneer website? Is there Instagram? Like what would be a way that you would like people to reach out or to find you guys?
I think the website's the easiest way, pastortopioneer.com. We are on Instagram and Facebook. They can find us there as well, where we interact with people and post content. But the easiest way, I'd say, is the website. They can get in touch with us there, reach out from there, and kind of get a general overview and some more depth of what we're doing and what we're about.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And so going back to the different trends that, Neal, that you mentioned, the 4 different trends, like the money and the identity and the other 2 that you mentioned, as people reach out to you, are there ways where you guys quickly begin to share maybe some helpful things as they begin to walk that out? Or is that something that they can find before they have a relationship with you guys? What is maybe some direction as people are listening right now? Like, man, I'm wrestling with the money question. I'm wrestling with the identity question. Should reaching out to you be the first step?
And we'd love to have a conversation with anyone. That's kind of what we do. The way that we really think about this and look at this is we think of it as a pastor's on a journey. That was true of me. It's true of Britton. Of course, it's true, Zach, of you too. And so we want to go and try to meet them where they're at, but also say, hey, we're walking kind of over in this direction. We're not going to be the ones who are going to like drag you along or anything like that. We want the Holy Spirit to be the primary driving force in this. But in that now is where we jump on a lot of these calls. And like the first calls are not like, hey, go through this immediate training. Some of the first calls might just be like, hey, what's your story? Like, where are you at? How'd you hear of this? Those sorts of things. But then from there does come some of the encouragement towards, hey, let's start talking about like, these are some of the ways we are living. We'd love to help you with that. And now we know, just because it is a people group and we've seen it enough times, that a few steps down the road, they might run into this or that problem or barrier or hardship. And we're trying to help earlier, just help them start thinking about that stuff in advance so that when it hits them, it doesn't have to hit them as hard. Because those are things Britton's run into, I've run into, the other coaches that we're working with, we've all run into them. So we're sitting here and we're like, hey, if you're going to kind of walk this journey, this is what's going to be ahead. And in love and in that relationship, we're trying to be like, just consider some of these things. So we do give explicit tools for like, hey, how do you actually go out and make some disciples? How do you be the church in the simple way? We give tools for that stuff through different training, but we're also trying to just walk through the relational side of like, how are you doing in this?
I think that's so key, because it's easy to be like, okay, we went through the training, we're good to go. Like, go do it now. You're in the training. But I always think
Here's
we
your
have
certificate.
10 here's your just, yeah, right. Print it off, put it on the wall. But the training it's 10 sessions, but all that is a framework for discussion and deeper relationships. And it's as these pastors start walking it out, wherever they're at in their journey, that's when the questions really start coming. And so I can't tell you how many times we'll talk about it, and it's kind of theoretical for some of these topics. And then they start walking out. They're like, okay, no, we talked about this. Can you remind me of this again? Can we talk about this again? Yep. And then the relationship really morphs into, how do we support you the best into what God's asking you to do? I have a couple guys and their spouses right now who are in the process of having conversations with their elders and leaders about how they're transitioning out. And my relationship with these guys has been super practical, where sometimes they're like, the meeting didn't go well. And we talk about that, and I try to encourage them. Or, hey, I'm going into this meeting with the elders. Here's what I'm thinking about covering. What do you think about this? Do you have any feedback? Hey, maybe consider this, or go this route, or don't do this. And following up, how did the meeting go? Like, it's just super practical of being a friend and being a support of, we haven't seen everything. There's a lot of things we don't know, but we have some experience in different contexts that I think we can be supportive of people in just super practical ways. And so it's always so fun when I get a call. Like, all right, I had the meeting last night. This is how it went. We're praising God for that. Thank you. Like, those are really awesome, because you get to play a small part in them walking in obedience to the journey that God has them on. And everyone's journey is different. It looks so different.
Yep.
There's a lot of common themes, but it's so different. And so it's fun that we get to be a part of that, and other people get to be a part of that journey with them and support them on their journey of walking with the Lord.
That's awesome. Amazing. Mm-hmm. Well, the way that we've been finishing these podcasts, Britton, is we've been doing the big three, just some quick three, short, kind of snappy questions and answers. So I'll throw the first one your way. What encouragement could you give to a pastor who's wrestling with a lot of this right now? Maybe feels stuck at his church with the elders, whatever the circumstances are. What is some encouragement you can give to this pastor to like take that leap of faith, take that next step?
You're not crazy. You're not crazy. The questions you are asking are good. And I think the other encouragement I say, if the Lord's telling you it's time to think about or start transitioning out, you are not the chief shepherd of that church. Jesus is. And as much as you love those people, Jesus loves them even more, and he's got them, and he'll take care of them. And you got to be obedient to what God's asking you to do, and he'll take care of you. And likewise, he'll take care of those that you're stepping away from, because he's their chief shepherd.
That's beautiful. So true. So true. Neal, I know I think this has been brought up in a previous episode, but I think is paramount, especially when we're talking about pastors as they're considering these things. Why is it so important for pastors to see a decentralized church in the city that has emerged, where these gifts are being used that are being used so much in the traditional church, like teaching, like shepherding? Because one thing we're not asking them to do is to hate the church, to hate the bride, and to, as we see this big deconstruction movement in our culture right now. This is not that at all. We're not calling them out of something. We're calling them back to the Word of God, right? So why is it so important for them to see a decentralized church in a city?
I think there's a lot of things that come to mind, but a few I think of the major ones is we talk a lot about like the priesthood of all believers. But what we really want to see happen is that become truly practiced. And to know that that can actually happen in some really beautiful, healthy ways, in a from house to house mentality, in a decentralized mentality, that we can be the church fully from house to house without a building centric and a pastor up front centric sort of a mentality. And when we start living into that, then you do see all these different gifts truly arise. So now it's not on the shoulders of one person to be the rock star in all of those categories, to be the best prophet, the best apostle, the best evangelist, shepherd, and teacher, as well as all the other gifts, that go into that. But instead, now it's truly trying to be a body. And this is hard, because I think a lot of people who are going to pioneer are going to be helping to usher in that work. They're not going to, unless you go to a place where this is already kind of happening, you are going to be the one who's helping to usher this in. And that still is hard. The last thing I'll just say on that real quickly is also just the reality that though we think this can be really beautiful, it doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't mean that it's easy. And it does not mean that it's clean and tidy all the time. It still can be really hard and really messy. And I would never want somebody to be disillusioned to think, oh, this is so much easier. Yeah. It's not always
Don't
easier.
romanticize it.
To not romanticize it. So
that's good. Well, Britton, final question to you, because I've already asked this one to Neal before. I believe, maybe I'm wrong. But what is your favorite and most enjoyable fun memory in your life? Totally off topic, not on what we're talking about right now. Just your most fun, enjoyable memory in your whole life.
Man, I've got tons. I got a ton of great memories, and I'm grateful for that. The first one that comes to my mind is when my dad was out of town. My mom was running errands. A friend of mine, we were probably in 8th grade. He and I went outside and we disassembled the outdoor trampoline and we put it in the living room and we reassembled it. It was like made for it. It was perfect. And they had this bridge. There's like a balcony that went in the living room.
Oh, no.
And my mom walked in the door that came right in. Right, she opened the doors right where the trampoline was. And we were just like jumping off of the banister onto it. And she just froze. She turned around. She went outside the garage. About 10 minutes later, she walked in and had words to be like, "What are you doing?" And like, well, it just made sense. And so, and this is how great my dad is. My dad passed 10 years ago, but he was right out of town. So my mom calls him and said, "You will not believe what Britton's doing. He put the outdoor trampoline in the living room." He goes, "I wondered about that. I saw him taking measurements in the living room the other day, and I thought that's maybe what he was up to. But I was just going to kind of wait and see what happened." And so they let us keep it up for a few days, and no one died. It was a great time.
Oh,
so it was just like tons of fun.
That's
It's just like memories
fantastic.
like that growing up.
I think you just like spoke out every childhood boy's dream right there.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Well, my wife's now like, "What's going to happen when our boys hear that story and want to do it?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to help them assemble it in the living room so that I can do that with them."
That's amazing.
That's what happens. I'm a dad of 3 boys. That's the way it is. That's the way
Hey,
it goes.
well, in our basement right now, my grandpa, not my grandpa, my dad, their grandpa gave us an inflatable bounce house that is now in our basement. I thought it was a horrible
That's what I'm
idea,
talking about.
and now I love it. They use it every single day, and just we have a bounce house in our basement. It's crazy. What in the world?
It's a great way to get energy out,
that's awesome.
especially in the wintertime.
Yes, amen to that. Well, for all those listening, we're going to have the links below where you can go to their website. You can email them. You can listen to even the podcast that's coming out, Pastor Pioneer, and all the different ways you can connect. But Britton and Neal, thank you guys so much for jumping on. Such an important and needed conversation and topic. If you're a pastor and you're listening to this, or you know a pastor who you've been having conversations with around these topics, please just feel that the nudge that you're feeling from the Spirit. Reach out. Talk to them, just start a relationship. I know these guys would love to walk with you and pray with you and discuss with you all that the Lord is putting on your heart. So Neal, Britton, thank you guys so much for taking time today.
Thank you for listening to the L1A podcast. If you are interested in learning more about this topic or getting connected with the other disciple makers in your area, visit loveoneanother.life. Again, that's loveoneanother.life.